So will an impeachment make passage of USMCA more likely, since Democrats do need something to show voters in 2020? Carol?
Yeah, poor USMCA. It's being held as a political hostage, and I certainly can't imagine that somebody's going to trade an impeachment vote for it. But that being said, it would be very smart for the Democrats to pass it as a shield for the perception that all that they're doing in Congress is political theater. They need to actually get something done. This would be a way for them to prove that they've done just anything, and I don't care why or how they do it. I just want to see it passed.
Yeah, so one, I'm a supporter of USMCA, so I think I have to make that very clear. But there's been over 400 bills passed on the House sitting on the Senate desk to pass. So when we talk about blaming the House, that's ridiculous. I would say, secondly, I was recently in Washington. I spoke to both Republicans and Democrats. It seems that there are 3 or 4 things still outstanding that neither side have been able to come to agreement on labor, environment, and some other standards. That being said, it would be great if we could pass it at year end, and I absolutely don't think that the Dems are holding up an impeachment vote for USMCA. I don't think that's the reason.
David, if the Clinton impeachment is any guide, if that is any historical guide, then Congress is basically going to do nothing. And that is a shame, because you've got businesses waiting for this, waiting for the passage of this trade deal. And it should be infuriating to all Americans that they're playing politics with trade. And you can see how this is working out. Trump wants the passage of it. It's in his political interest, but he also doesn't want it to pass, because then he can blame the Democrats for doing nothing. The Democrats don't want to give Trump a win, but of course they don't want to look like they're doing nothing. So they're playing politics. And meanwhile, American business is just trying to survive these trade wars and get America's economy rolling.
Yeah, to Robert's point, I think it's really important to note that there are some outstanding issues there. So I think the Democrats are sort of dragging their feet because they don't really have an incentive here to move the ball forward when it comes to USMCA. And that's really hurtful and sad for the country, because you think about, David, we talked about who are your constituents. At the end of the day, Nancy Pelosi, if you hate Donald Trump, you're really hurting everybody else by not passing this through. And then to speak to the stock market side of it, market's down today because it's worried about China. The president is saying, look, I may impose more tariffs if I have to. And the market is saying, if we could get USMCA done, at least it would be so positive going into the end of the year with China hanging out in the balance.
But, it's not just the markets. It's not just Wall Street, Carol. It's also the unions. The unions want a deal as well. The unions have a lot vested in more commerce between Mexico and Canada and the United States. I'm wondering if they're going to be putting their pressure on Democrats, and maybe that'll do the trick.
I mean, they should be. Unions, small business. I mean, frankly, everyone. This is an important piece of legislation, and it's very frustrating that it is a political football. I know Robert says there's a bunch of bills that have been passed in the House, but nothing substantial. This is a major trade deal and something that theoretically both sides should be behind. They should at least bring it to a vote. If there are some issues outstanding, then let people go on the record for that. But the reality is we all know that if they put it to a vote, it's going to pass, and that's what they should be doing.
Okay, by the way, I have some breaking news on this subject. We're getting news now that Speaker Pelosi did have a meeting with AFL-CIO's leader Trumpka. That agreement can be reached on USMCA trade deal if Trump administration makes it, quote, enforceable for America's workers. Is that a big stumbling block, Robert?
It is. So, as you know, I was on the President's Export Council, which is bipartisan. So I'm for USMCA. I was for TPP, and I was for TTIP. So I think I'm
all the T's.
I think I'm right now to the right of the Conservative Party when it comes to non-barriers for the country. This is a very important issue because this has a lot to do with making sure that labor enforcement and wages are being put at the right amount in Mexico. So otherwise,
raising wages in Mexico,
raising wages in
closer
Mexico
to
closer to ours. So therefore, what's called living standards. We don't move businesses offshore because there's a labor arbitrage. That's critical. That's why I said before there's labor issues and there's environmental issues. There are also some other issues. I think Jackie said it right. This is not. If you took an up and down vote, it would probably pass. But I think it could pass. With 75+% of the vote, if we had that, it would truly be bipartisan.
It's just not a high priority for them right now, and that's really a shame.
Yeah, I mean, and David, as frustrating as those types of provisions are, because they, in effect, raise the prices for those of us here in the States who want to buy cars, Congress has always kind of prided themselves in being able to, what do they say, walk and chew gum at the same time? Right. So if oversight is a responsibility with the impeachment, then certainly so is passing this trade deal, which, as Carol pointed out, is so valuable, not just to big corporations, but to every American who's got skin in this game.
Let me ask you, because you're an uber free trader and a libertarian as well. So you don't like any trade restrictions, but you don't like the government to enforce rules about salaries and so forth. Could you live with the new labor rules in order to get a free trade deal?
David, I think, as they always say, the market hates uncertainty. So I think at this point, if we're going to have a trade deal, some trade deals so consumers and producers, big and small, can have some certainty moving forward. Any trade deal, I think, would be a benefit as opposed to the mess that we have now.
You will not get a trade deal passed without living wages or labor standards. You just won't. I mean, that was the most important thing with TPP, making sure if we went to Vietnam or Indonesia that we weren't paying 30 cents an hour for labor.
But you know that
it's just not going to happen.
This cannot be renegotiated. And just as you said, if you had an up and down vote, it would pass. So the reality is you could pass that and you could go back and work on that afterwards. But there's no way they're going to go back and try and retrade the deal now. It's just not going to happen.
Can I tell you something? Most things would pass an up and down vote. Go do universal background checks. It would pass in a second on an up and down vote. There are a lot of big things being stalled because of this polarizing environment that would pass on an up and down vote.
But without getting too much into weeds, you talk about living wages. Living wages here are very different than living wages in Mexico. And a lot of people would argue that the jobs that the Mexicans who are working in the car factories have right now are actually pretty good by Mexican standards.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. I'm not debating you. I just know that we will continue to ship jobs overseas if the arbitrage of labor and environmental standards continue to be so onerous on us versus rest of the world. That's just a fact. That's why we have a trade imbalance everywhere.
Yeah. And David, interestingly, this is where the president enjoys a lot of support from the unions who know that their jobs are threatened by cheaper overseas labor. They're the ones, ironically, who are in favor of higher wages overseas that keeps those manufacturing jobs here in America.
I just wish we could get a vote. That's up to Nancy Pelosi.